John Galsworthy, the conscientious woman. Like Shaw and Barker, Galsworthy wrote serious plays to make the public think about social issues. A man of conservative outlook and artistic temperament, he avoided the blatant method of a preacher. The crowning glory of his career was the Nobel Prize awarded for his fiction. As a playwright, he is remembered for his warm humanity and sympathetic identification with his weak and oppressed character. Though not to be a feminist, he shows a deep concern about women's position and problems. He advocated votes for women and campaigned for the revision of divorce laws so as to facilitate dissolution of unhappy marriages without the pretense of adultery. He even supported the cause of London prostitutes who moved him to pity. While writing plays, he could not remain unaffected by the spirit of the new drama. Well known playwrights like Pinero and Jones had raised questions about the subjugation and exploitation of women, but they always ended their plays with reinforcement of patriarchal values to appease the Victorian audience. The breakthrough was achieved by Shaw and Archer and Granville Barker, who championed Ibsen's ideas with their translation and performance. Despite his denials of any influential writings of Ibsen or Shaw, Galsworthy refined the art of naturalism of the former and shared the moral earnestness of the latter. He dedicated his first plays, The Silver Box Joy and Strife, to Granville Barker, who staged him successfully at the Court Theatre. His reputation was subject to fluctuation from the trying years of the 30s to the oblivion of the 40s. Some of the tropical problems of the days may have been obsolete after a century, but the humanitarian approach to social problems is never likely to grow stale. Hence, the 50s and 60s saw the revival of interest in his work, which climaxed in 1967. The year of his birth centenary, he was hailed as a reformer and humanist, but his contribution to women's causes still remain unappreciated. His New Woman and a new interpretation of sexual morality deserve close study. After his initial start with women as a hunted species in the silver box, Galsworthy attempted to create a new woman in Joy, a deserted wife with a problem adolescent daughter who develops a strong aversion for her mother's lover. In his psychological battle of nerves, she wins her autonomy and breaks away from the image of the submissive woman. The play was not well received by the public, possibly because of the unconventional characterization and the triumph of the assertive woman who rejects the Victorian virtue of self denial. He had to wait for another 5 years before he could create another unconventional woman of courage and conviction in the eldest son. Goldsworthy's women characters have received less than their share of critical attention. Even after this so called rehabilitation, little beyond his early problem plays like The Silver Box, Strife, and Justice is known to the public. There has not been such a serious study of the middle and late plays. The eclipse the image of the humanitarian artist and a problem playwright has eclipsed much of its novelty in characterization and experiments in somewhat subversive plays such as Joy, The Eldest Son, The Fugitive, The Skin Game, and The Widows. Allard D. Nicole admitted that Goldsworthy's art of arousing sympathy was admitted that was dramatically more effective than Shaw's scintillating wit and laughter. Their approach to social problems is different. To Shaw, prostitution, for example, was a manifestation of economic exploitation of women. Goldsworthy simply treated it as an evidence of immorality of men. as expressed in Escape. Clean streets, that's the cry, clean men, that would be better. This humanitarian attitude and insistence on justice for the weak and the oppressed would have made him a human rights activist in the present age. The new drama of Shaw Granville Barker Goldsworthy inducted the angry young woman in the same way as the new drama of Pinter and Osborne introduced the angry young man in 1950s. The advancement in women's position is obvious from the comparative study of Pinero's name team ending in the case of rebellious Susan, in which women conclude, "We poor women cannot retaliate," and Goldsworthy's emancipated wives like Mrs. Queen, Mrs. Builders, Mrs. Strangeway, who desert their husband without any qualms or indeed without tragic consequences. Rebellious Susan, who sets out to pay back her philandering husband in his own coin, is finally manipulated to fit into stereotype Victorian wife. In The New Woman and Problem Place, Catherine Willie criticized the Pinero and James for the conservative portrayal of the new woman. She took them to task for focusing on what the heroine does rather than what she is. The assertive wives of Goldsworthy's plays demonstrate that desertion need not be male monopoly. The Unfolding Universe from Codename God Money Bhaumik. More than 5,000 feet above Los Angeles and a scant 45 minutes from downtown, the once great observatory on Mount Wilson still stands in some disrepair and as much a destination for picnickers and gliding aficionados as for working astronomers in the winter months, while the Los Angeles basin suns itself at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow falls on the cluster of white domes and in the deep pine forest that surrounds them. Today, researchers from various universities utilize Mount Wilson's telescope, retrofitted with adaptive optics to counteract atmospheric disturbances and to minimize the light pollution from the city. Back in the 1920s, however, when an ambitious young astronomer named Edwin Hubble focused the observatory's shining new 100-inch Hooker telescope to the nebulae, the stars burned brighter than any constellation of city lights. Hubble settled a cosmic question pending since the time of Kant and found the suspected island universes instead to be individual galaxies, some flung to the edge of visibility. Strange as it seems now, science did not have observational proof before Hubble's time, a mere three quarters of a century ago, that the universe consisted of more than our Milky Way. Telescopes powerful enough to look clearly beyond it did not exist. With this discovery coming as it did within a decade of Einstein's proposed model of the universe based on general relativity, the cosmos took an enormous leap in size, but it was what Hubble and Vesto Slipher discovered when they began to measure the color spectra of these distant new galaxies that made Einstein seem a reluctant prophet and cosmology a nascent branch of science. Einstein, you see, in spite of what his own equations implied, believed along with everyone else at the time that the universe was essentially static. Hubble discovered otherwise. He found indisputable evidence that the galaxies were on the move, most of them slipping rapidly away from each other and from us. The more distant the galaxy, the faster it was receiving. Not only was the universe not static, it was undergoing dynamic expansion. The implications of Hubble's remarkable discovery were not immediately apparent. Even to Hubble himself, some ideas were just too big to be processed quickly. It took two more decades and the concentrated efforts of men like George Lemaitre, George Gamow, and others to put the issue on the table. If the future was taking the galaxies farther and farther apart, then it stood to reason that in the past they must have been closer together. So close ultimately that matter's compression due to effects of gravity might result in what Einstein's equation predicted to be a singularity, a point where the laws of the universe would simply break down. The conditions immediately preceding this jaw-dropping event would have been hotter than any hell one can possibly imagine, because that's what happens when the matter is compressed. This fact of physics pointed to clues that eventually made the case for a cosmic explosion as an event that kicked off the expansion of the universe. George Lemaitre, a Belgian priest, conceived the idea, and British astronomer Fred Hoyle in jest coined the term Big Bang to describe the explosion. Being, you ask, as in a very big no noise. Bang, as you ask, as in a very big noise. Well, no. A noise, big or little, requires a medium to carry the sound waves. You may remember the promotional tagline for the movie Alien: in space, no one can hear you scream. It's not even accurate to speak of Big Bang as an explosion. Rest assured, however, they were to take place in your living room, it would make a very big noise indeed, because we are talking about something infinitely dense, suddenly undergoing incredibly rapid expansion.